So I would like to introduce the four speakers, and maybe we just go to the first speaker, and let's start with Toomas Hendrik Ives, if he's ready. So can we have Toomas? Toomas.
Not ready, so maybe someone else can go first.
Well, then if Eva is ready, we'll go with Eva. Eva Kali. Okay, then if Eva's not ready yet, then I suggest, because I see Lalana. Lalana, it's not as if you're like, sort of all of these things may happen, but so yes, you're leading the decentralized information group, and you're very much involved with something called Solid, and I think we're going to hear a little bit about that. And you also have some slides. So if you want to start off, that would be fantastic.
So I'm happy to start. I just wanted to know if my slides were on. Can you see my slides? Because I don't see them.
I think the production has some kind of a wizardly way with that.
They say it's coming up.
Yeah. That's it. There it is.
They are? Okay, that's great. So thank you so much, Rob. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. I know that we have a very tight schedule and I have just 3 minutes, so I'm going to talk very quickly. And what I'd like to talk about are a couple of technical approaches that we can adopt that I think would lead to a more private and user-centric internet. Next slide, please. So as you all know, the current web is a collection of walled gardens where each garden or social networking site is beautiful. It provides a lot of functionality that we require, but they tend to stand alone. These web services are centralized and have the sole authority to control the data of all of their users. It's very hard to get data out of them or to integrate data across them or even to move to new applications. We have complete application lock-in right now. There's also a problem with identity. And by this, I mean that apps require users to create identifiers or to use a single sign-on provided by Google or Facebook. So what this means is that users are at the mercy of the service. If the service goes down, users are unable to access their data. And if the services change their terms of service, the users have no option but to comply. Next slide, please. Decentralization of the web is an exciting approach that we've been thinking about. And we think this is going to help with data protection and privacy by always leaving the data under user control. We have been developing an architecture called Solid that tries to do just this. Another important aspect of decentralization is that users should be able to control their own identity. Solid supports a decentralized identity and authentication mechanism called WebID OIDC, such that we don't require any single identity provider that users have to rely on. They can pick any identity provider that they trust, and they can use it for providing authentication to all their services, all the services that they're interested in using. Users can also have multiple identities. Next slide, please. So on the current web, data and applications are very tightly coupled. To send or to receive messages, you have to use something like a Twitter. To connect with your social network, you need to use Facebook. For events, and you need to use calendar and so on. So even though it's your data, you have to use a particular application to access the data. So in the Solid platform, the data is managed independently of the applications that actually create or consume this data. This means users can move between applications very easily. So if there's a new application that provides functionality that I require, I can use that application very easily without having to worry that I'm going to have to recreate all this data again. The data always remains under the user's control. And this means they can also decide which applications can access their data and what kind of data they can access and how. Each user is allowed to pick where they want to store this data, and they can store it in any web accessible storage. We call these personal data stores. Each user can have one or more stores from different providers and can easily switch between providers as well. So under Solid, a user is not locked into any application or locked into any storage provider. And lastly, for a truly decentralized web, each person should also be able to control their identity. This identity should be usable across different sites so that it is possible to authenticate someone globally for all websites, for all services that they might use. The way this is done is by using a web ID as a login. And a web ID is a unique identifier for a specific user on the web. What it is that it points to a document that describes the user, and the description could be their first name, their last name, affiliation, any data that the user might want to provide. And this information also includes the location of their solid personal data store. As I mentioned earlier, you can have many identity providers, and the only requirement is that they implement this protocol. And the protocol, again, as I said, is WebID OIDC. And the protocol allows users to prove that they own the specified login, that they have access to this particular web ID. Once they are authenticated, the store uses access control mechanisms to decide whether an application has access to the data or not. So in this way, taken together, decentralized data and identity leads to greater user control and privacy, and I believe are ideal for the next generation of the internet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sort of, I just have one question. What's holding this back?
So this is a very different way of doing app development. We're used, both the users and the app developers are used to a certain style of doing development. So there's a little bit of a mind change. We also have to kind of wean users off and get them to use these new applications. So there's a little bit of a learning curve for everyone.
Thank you very much. And of course, this is also co-authored and co-thought out with by the originator of the web, Tim Berners-Lee. And so
yes,
it seems that this is something that's pretty well thought out and that we need to really address very seriously, which we will do in a discussion.
yes.
So thank you, Lalana. I think now.
Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. So let's see if we can go to our one of the other speakers, and let's see if Toomas Hendrik Ilves, if he's online.
Well, I'll just start. We had to take a very different. I mean, I'm going to talk about use of IDs in all forms of governance and the private sector where they're interested in it. But again, I'm wary of any ID system that does not provide really good security, because all kinds of spoofing, man-in-the-middle attacks are all possible with any kind of system that does not minimally use end-to-end encryption and two-factor authentication, which is what we do in our governmental system, which provides, in fact, all public services except for 3, which is getting married, getting divorced, or buying real estate. And so, I mean, that is then tied into a distributed data exchange layer that connects everything up. So we don't have these walled gardens. You can access any governmental data using your ID and using two-factor authentication. So, I mean, this is our concern, of course, is, first of all, the secure identity, especially because, I mean, people wouldn't trust our records, our medical data, or anything else digitally if it were not absolutely secure. And on top of that, of course, on the sort of the back end side of things, we also on all critical or sensitive data we have been using since 2008 blockchain to make permission blockchain to make sure that nothing is changed without without permission. But anyway, to get to the issue of identity, I think that if people are willing to use other forms of identity, then that's fine. But I don't, I mean, at least for anything that becomes, that is kind of music coming in there, I don't know where that's coming from. For me, that's
Maybe
sort
we
of
were discussing security and yeah.
are you
So what are you hearing?
music and waves? I don't know where it's coming from.
It started when you mentioned security. And end-to-end security.
I think this is your promo that came on.
Well, from where I am, I have very little control over the entire system as we speak. So I think let's try to continue as we can, because of course you being president in a very critical and vital moment in Estonia, when the system sort of came alive and became robust, and was also under attack, sort of in these serious situations.
Yeah.
What I'm very interested is in how the thinking in Estonia, that is so advanced, that could, in my view, be sort of ported to a 500 million zone in some way, which I think would be the ideal way, sort of to make Europe into some kind of e-Estonia. How the combination of let's say engineers, politicians, sociologists, psychologists, what it took to actually build the mental model to build such a political framework, that must have been it must have been something. I'm not going to say that we could replicate this, but what did it take to
Well,
actually come to such a
political will, I think, is what it takes, and also slowly realizing that you do not have to replicate your paper bureaucracy in digital form. I mean, actually, the true advantage you get out of the system we use is that for the first time in the history of bureaucracy, government processing is a parallel process, not a serial one. Ever since bureaucracy was invented some 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, be it in China, Mesopotamia, or Egypt, I mean, you basically have scribes who then, I mean, they're record keepers who then pass the paper on to someone else that passes on to someone else. But you can do all of that at once. I mean, looking at from the user side, when a child is born in Estonia, the hospital asks the name, informs the population registry, and from there on, everything is set in motion. You get your birth certificate, you're in the population registry, you get your health care, you get whatever. The parent gets paternal or maternal leave. All of that happens automatically. It's all parallel processing. It took a while to figure that one out, but you can in fact do it. Now, in terms of obstacles to the EU doing this, I don't see many other than lack of political will. The ADAS directive actually mandates every EU member to offer a digital identity to its citizens. Now, whether a citizen takes that up or not is actually the crucial question, because if you have limited, I mean, if unfortunately, it must be mandatory. You don't have to use your ID ever, but if you do not have it mandatory for everyone, and we do already need to have an ID in most countries in Europe, it just doesn't have to be digital, is that the uptake rate is 15 to 20% statistically, generally. Now, from the point of view of government or any private entity that would use the ID, and I mean here predominantly banks, will not invest in the digital, may not make the investments in the digital changes that are necessary, because if you have 15% of the population only with a digital ID, then from the point of view of the government and from the point of view of, say, the banks, they'll say, well, why bother investing in digitization, because 85% of the population is not going to use this anyway. So that's like a crucial political decision that needs to be made. Once you've done that, then what you really need to do is, I mean, you make your architectures compatible with each other, and that's what we've done with our architecture, so that I mean, we use this thing called X-Road, X-ROAD. You can look it up on YouTube. There's one called X-Road. Longer version is 3.5 minutes. It describes it all fairly easily.
Clear that, yes. It's clear that we need you back. That's for sure. And just one quick
back
comment.
Where? I'm back.
Oh, you're back. Sort of. I thought you were at the Hoover Institute.
No, I'm back. I'm on my farm in Estonia now.
Fantastic. Well, then that's good news. Just one quick comment. Take one quick comment before we go to Eva Kiley, who is also in the panel. And sort of, I think from your perspective, it's clear that you have a good view that identity is more than just people. It's objects, it's machines, it's robots, it's infrastructure, it's goods. But this is a very, very complex issue. So trying to get political will for this kind of, let's say, cybernetics, that's again a whole different story, I would say. What do you think about that?
Well, clearly we will have to move to the point where everything that is digital has a digital identity. I mean, that's just, I mean, one of the backbones of our system, or sort of in terms of public trust, is that all interactions using the identity are logged, and that means that other people's are as well, and any kind of unauthorized access to any database is either completely restricted, or if if the systems administrator level you start
dropping a little bit here, but yeah.
So that all interactions are logged. Now, I mean, we have the prohibited interactions. I mean, the police can't look at my medical records, but even at the level of, say, higher level systems administrators who theoretically could look into something they're not authorized to do, they are, I mean, anything that is remotely unauthorized is flagged immediately. And few isolated cases that we've had, they are immediately identified and fired. So I just one minor point is that you mentioned cyber attacks. I mean, we had massive cyber attacks in 2008, but they were DDoS, or distributed denial of service attacks, which never got into the system. And in fact, they didn't actually touch the system. They touched just about everything else, but they didn't come upon that. But I guess that's because it's very hard to even attack the system without an ID. So, I mean, so far we've been very secure, knock on wood, and we have a high degree of trust in the system. But I think as this is it is a complex issue, but we need to begin to deal with it because the level of cybersecurity is so low. Every time I buy a book from Amazon, I cringe, because I go, well, what? I mean, all it is an email address and maybe even it could be a 10-digit alphanumerical password, but that's still brute force hackable. And to use anything like that, anything more sensitive, is, I think, unconscionable. And that's why we do need to go over to two-factor authentication and end-to-end encryption on virtually everything.
Yes. Well, I think this is a very strong and clear point. So with this point, I would like to go over to what's then privacy. And so I would like to move to Gus Hosein. If that's possible. I hear that Gus Hosein is online. Hello, Gus.
Hello.
So, so from your point of view as executive director of Privacy International, on this topic of identity, so what's your immediate take on this?
Well, look, first of all, the first two speakers are excellent speakers, and Lalana's technology, and I just have such respect for what they're developing. And Toomas's point about security is absolutely core. And if these were normal times, I would say that it's possible to do the three things that we all want, which is an identity system that can empower people and they can maintain control over their data, that industry would become increasingly aware, and we're seeing indications that their duties to do no harm when it comes to identity. And that governments are recognizing that people's confidence in a system is sacred. But these are not normal times, and we're essentially paying for our collective sins at this moment, in that confidence is low, particularly at a time when we needed trust in our infrastructure, our social systems, our economic systems, our government systems. Trust and confidence is incredibly low. Second, equity is glaringly absent, particularly from identity systems. Identity systems are about who we want to include, and far too often who we want to exclude. And as we see with the politics of today, we're focusing much more on who we can exclude from these identity systems. And then third, unfortunately, the very notion of an empowering system, it glosses over the idea that we should actually be removing obstacles people are facing. Instead, we're saying that an identity system would empower people to jump over obstacles and hurdles that we're putting before people. But we're not questioning whether those obstacles and hurdles should be there to begin with. So we're not questioning SIM registration, financial authorization registration, the role of data brokers in our lives, the exploitation of data by companies and governments. All we're asking is if we can make identity systems smoother and sexier and sweeter, when we should be asking these harder questions.
So I think this raises also the point of awareness with basically everyone, right? So with the general audience, but also with policymakers. And so what are the main obstacles in your view to keep asking these like sweet questions, to keep asking like to keep focusing on the usability and the UX, sort of to keep having this trade-off about easy logins and sort of the harder questions that we need to build. So is there any what do you think would actually, is there some kind of, like COVID of course, so is there some kind of moment that could sort of grab everyone's attention? Because the cyber security hacks are probably not enough, sort of to actually get this kind of awareness out at this vital moment where we are now seeing that if digital identity becomes sort of not part of some kind of multi-stakeholder governance, but part of let's say just a few parties that are not also quite democratically accountable, and that actually sort of sounds like signing away the entire capabilities to a new world, which is this hybrid world where this analog and digital is merging with the objects and the AR and the VR and all these technologies that we heard about also in the summit. So identity seems to be this kind of cornerstone, this kind of block, this kind of key to the door. And if you lose the key to the door, well, you won't open. It's sort of like because you've been also co-authoring a book recently on these challenges, on these global challenges. So what are the hardest challenges that you find?
Yeah, for my sins, that book is 10 years old. I've been working on identity systems since the pre-9/11 era. And the lesson from all of those experiences, whether it's post 9/11, whether it's innovations in passports, whether it is company X with its latest idea on identity systems, or government, countless governments now, and the World Bank being excited about identity, and the EU again looking at identity. The challenge is that building an identity system is incredibly hard, and it takes a lot of political capital, as Toomas was saying, and financial capital. And usually the body that is creating the ID is hoping to get something out of it. Whether it is, if it's the Interior Ministry, it wants to know everybody who's in the country and who shouldn't be in the country. If it's the tax agency, they want everybody involved, without regard to their immigration status. If it is the health agency, they want everybody with as much trust as possible. But to build a system that all of these sectors can trust, and we as humans can trust, requires a benevolence and a financial pocket that nobody is interested in promoting at the moment. And that's the hard political reality. If you can imagine, if we start this debate now at the European Union, within 2 years, we'll be talking about where do migrants fit in? Where does poverty alleviation fit in? Where does employment status fit in? And then before you know it, you've created a monster, even though your initial sentiments were spot on.
Yes. So I think this is also where we're paying the price for the flukes, basically. That was TCP/IP, the internet itself, and www, HTML also in a way. They were capable of sort of inventing this Baron von Münchhausen moment, where you could still sort of put yourself up by the hair and put yourself in a different place, which is now what we want to do. But now all eyes are on the situation, all actors are aware, and like you say, it seems like nobody's voting for, let's say, the citizen in a way. So nobody's voting for the sort of, that's, I would say, something to keep for the discussion. So let's try to go over to the fourth speaker and try to see if Eva Kylie's online. And I heard there were some issues with her connectivity, and I hope everything is fine. And then we could get Eva Kaili, MEP from Greece and chair of STOA, and very much active on blockchain and AI in the European Parliament. If that's not possible, then I suggest we bring all speakers up and we go into a general discussion. Also, so there were some questions from the audience. And then maybe Eva can join us later. So Lalana, if you seems that you have quite an actionable solution, and does it involve hardware? Sort of, is it? Do we need a box? Sort of like, do we need to install something in our homes sort of in order to make this work?
So you don't need hardware. As I mentioned earlier, your data can live in any web accessible storage. So anything that you could get, you could run it on your phone if you like, as long as you don't mind paying for extra, for a larger data plan or something. But it just needs to be web accessible. So all our technologies are grounded in web technologies.
Good. There's a question here from Ike van Emeren, and he says, for Lalana, take it first, and what do you think the conditions should be before a city accepts or recognizes data from a vault-like, solid-like? So from the tech requirements to governance. So what happens if solid or a solid-like will be sold to another or something? So did you get that question? Or? I can, maybe I should repeat it, but I think, Gus, you're moving, sort of, so I got you. So if, what are the immediate obstacles that you're facing now in your work, and especially with regard to identity, and especially with regard to this idea that European Union is setting up this secure ID?
Well, I think as we saw with the response to, say, COVID, the leap towards technology and technological design in our discourse, which I would normally greet. The fact that we're thinking of the technology details is a good sign to some degree, but that's what we saw in the first few months of, say, the pandemic response. And what we ended up seeing is that we like to focus on the things that we think we can solve, which are the technical layer, and we ignore the logistics and where it hits the ground, where it affects real people. And so whether it was the focus on apps that would track the spread of COVID without thinking whose phones would it work on? Do you have to buy a new phone for the app to work? Will you be forced to use it? Whether it is through soft compulsion or hard compulsion and quarantine. These are the types of questions we need to be asking, these societal level kinds of questions that pose all forms of logistical challenges. But instead, unfortunately, we focus too early just at the, wouldn't it be cool if we could do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, I think in a way you've been describing this a little bit yourself, in a sense that I see. Hello, Lalana, you're back. Yes.
Hello.
Good to see. Hello, good to see you. I have a question for you in a second. I was just going to. Hello. Can you hear me? Well, for whatever's worth, I've got great music that's coming from elevators. So it seems like we're in a real hotel at a good conference before the whole webinar closing down time. But Gus, to stay with your earlier remark on the difficulty, because it seems it's so hard to get things real. And in a way, of course, you're not making yourself easy with the Privacy International. And as you've also, I think, seen and looked at the UN level and at the level of ID systems that's coming from there, in a kind of global way, it's of course an immense complex question. And like you were saying, that you could then end up with some kind of a solution that's patching things on to and forgetting what it was for in the first place, and actually then starts to looking at all kinds of idiosyncrasies and all kinds of things that are relevant for the moment, for the time, and which is, of course, very, very important. So you're not making it yourself easy, if I would say, sort of. So why are you making it so hard on yourself? Do you think there is a Privacy International solution possible?
I absolutely do believe it is possible. It would just require benevolence from very powerful institutions. It would be like saying, yes, build an identity system with the least amount of data possible, which would mean Silicon Valley wouldn't want to build it because they couldn't exploit the data, with as little reliance as possible, so that big institutions like banks can't get involved to try to monetize the transactions, and with the least amount of institutional obstacles. So governments couldn't get in the way in order to make it hard to get access to an identity. And so then all of a sudden people, the powerful institutions would say, well, why do we want this? And they'll forget that the whole point was to create an identity that would be useful for people.
Yeah. But I think this is the kind of moment that that shows the difficulties. I mean, registration of people in China began in 278, which was BC. So the first emperor, 278 BC, set up a registration system of people. In Europe, we did this 2,000 years later. Napoleon came along in 1800 and he wanted his soldiers for conscription. So he decided that everybody should be identified. So he knew when the guys turned 18, so he could go to war with them. But this is 2,000 years later, sort of. And the thing is, I fundamentally and absolutely agree with you that we are now discussing at a moment in time in which the reality is actually very much about extended identity, this identity for people. But and then on top of this, we've got to come to the conclusion, or we got to go with the idea that identity nowadays is partly my credentials or what I present as credentials is partly what my devices tell about me, and I've got lots of devices around me that's telling me lot of things about me that I don't maybe not aware of, and it's also behavior. So with some of these new privacy by design solutions called coalition.org, which they have mapped everyday life in terms of turning every human activity into a number. And this is all JSON files, and they can run very easily in the Nest or in the cameras out there. So in a moment in time, I'm fully with you that we are trying to talk about people and identity for people. This identity is already sort of slipping away from us. It's becoming fluid. And then at this moment in time, we've got to find a way to discuss and talk about this extended identity.
I love everything that you're saying, because I'm so tired of the identity debate, and I've been in it way too long, where we think it's just about the passwords. We think it's just about the ID card. We think it's just about that singular number within a database, when it's exactly as you say. It is the imprint we leave behind, knowingly and unknowingly. It's the data that's taken from us without even our knowledge that it's being created. And that's getting worse. That's getting more rampant. And whether it was all the discussion of IoT, Internet of Things a few years ago, or smart infrastructure today, and 5G tomorrow, if that ever happens, we do need to reconcile with that massive amount of data that's being generated, and how that can actually create an identity for you, vis-a-vis countless institutions, many of whom you don't even know exist. And how do we protect within that? How do we protect when the infrastructure can't be trusted? It might be based in California at one moment in time, and China the next moment in time, and we have no control over it. Can we build an infrastructure that can survive all of that? And that's where technologically I'm very much interested in the work that Lalana is doing, and in Solid, and there's a few other technological options out there, but we still have to, as Toomas was saying, it's like, what about the devices, and the devices we don't even own that are around us in the smart city environment? How do we manage all of that? And right now, what we have is pure chaos, where we have unthinking deployment, just saying it's called innovation, get with it or move on. And I just think we're being incredibly dumb at a time we're supposed to be smart.
Well, I think it's fantastic that this is brought up in this debate, because this is the vital things that need to be brought up. And just if I may say, you should stay in a debate for quite some time now. You can't run away now because we need you now, because this is exactly what needs to be said. And you've got all the data, information, and the networks, and the know-how, and the knowledge. So this is the moment where you can actually, I think, because we also, in lots of NGI projects, we've been working on this also from this IoT angle. And we've got some very, very logical plug-in ideas for your kind of thinking, if you would be open for that. So I would love to have a discussion with you about that.
You're making me excited about this space again. That sounds fantastic.
Well, that's the whole point of this whole summit, I guess, to like our also host was saying, we cannot have a naive hopefulness, because that's insane. We know far too much, and this is also a critical, vital moment. But we do need some agency, and because without a notion of agency, we're not going to do anything. But so Lalana, just because Gus was sort of very optimistic, very positive about. Exactly, I would think, bringing in the device layer into this identity. And how would you see this IoT angle in that space?
So I don't. So I guess I missed a bunch of the discussion. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why the connection was very poor. Do you mean using IoT devices as identifiers, or storing data on IoT devices, or both?
I think both.
Because each of them means something different. So I'm sorry,
Yes.
go ahead.
Well, the idea is basically that if we talk about this extended identity, where identity is something that you prove about yourself, but also your objects tell about yourself and your behavior
Right.
captured by lots of, let's say, AI machine learning is also doing. So there's these three type of layers that's building this kind of, let's say, trust identity kind of level. And I think Gus was saying that Solid, coming from this kind of infrastructure thinking, would have an edge in thinking about how such an extended identity could function in a trust environment.
Yes. So as I said earlier, the idea is that a user or an entity in the system would have a unique identifier that is globally authentic. That you can authenticate in at a global scale. So it would definitely scale for IoT devices as well. So there is no problem with that.
Thank you. I see that we have Eva coming up. So Eva, are you with us? So we have Eva Kiley. Hello. So Eva, have you been managing to follow a little bit of the discussion? Oh, you have no sound. But we can hear you. So I think you could talk. I think. Okay, well, then we continue this conversation very soon in another format, and it's just well, it's said that we cannot sort of bring you on, but that's, I would say, part of the whole situation in which we're now with all of this taking everything online. But maybe if someone could text Eva that we can hear her, I think. No. No, we cannot hear you either. No. Okay. Sorry about this. And my apologies also to all the people in the chat and the viewers that we could not bring on Eva and have her speak. Then sort of, I think we can end on a very positive note, and actually something very important is that we kept Gus in the game in this session, and that's extremely important. So wrapping up, I would say that that it's especially this debate at the moment with the AIDAS consultation closing October 2, with all the work being done at the moment in Europe about a secure ID, with the notion of extended identity that seems to resonate along the people in the panel. I think we've sort of unearthed quite some good content, and I want to thank you for watching this and for being so active. And of course, it's recorded, and all the questions will be answered in online in blogs and reports. And with this, I would like to close the session. Thank you, Lalana. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Gus. Thank you, of course, Mr. Toomas Hendrik Ives, for your presence, which I think was extremely helpful. And sort of with this, I think we close and we move on to a short break. Thank you very much.